It should be an intergovernmental agency. It should be something on top of what exists. Now, Transparency International is a non-government institution which is doing an excellent job. But Transparency's job is to raise awareness about global corruption. There's a great job which is being done by the World Bank Anti-Corruption Unit. OECD has a mechanism. United Nations has UN Anti-Corruption Convention, and a lot of other efforts are being taken inside this institution, but I would say too many countries. FATF is gathering information, but I'm afraid all of these efforts, which are pretty efficient, has not yet reached a level of really saying that global corruption has been somewhat restricted or limited. I think it's fine as far as the legal framework and the judicial systems, including, by the way, the international courts, where they brought to justice recently Taylor. Unfortunately, it is still a unique example. There should be more Taylors, because these Taylors have been abundant in Africa. So when they've been writing off this $160 billion outstanding African debt, probably you would take about half of that has been pocketed by, say, 10, 12 dictators. Look at what Zimbabwean Mugabe was let free to do in the country. Apparently most of the African countries united around him. And most of the Western countries, unfortunately, looked the other way. The main reason for the economic crisis might have been global corruption. Because I made some quantitative calculations. Say, let's assume that Enron, WorldCom, Bernie Madoff, Parmalat, finance and leasing company, which is a state company in this country, which embezzled $500 million. It has been in the world press, Financial Times and Wall Street Journal. Probably in Moscow, we could talk about $20 billion pocketed by this bureaucracy at the top level. And of course, laundered outside this country and invested into certain properties in France and maybe in Britain, Swiss banks, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. We all know these routes. I mean, it's pretty clear. We know, in the newspapers, we know 90% of everything. And the 10% is just the proof if you bring it to a court of justice. And I intentionally do make no difference between the mayor of a big city and the head of an investment fund, who was sitting in a small room. In the other room, he was actually cooking up completely falsified documentation as far as really making transactions and making profits for its clients. Because the difference between a state corporation, a budget of a big city, a budget of a country, a big fund, or big private corporations is negligible. Because these guys are managers. In some cases they are elected, some cases they are not. But as I said, I mean, they treat our money, which is public's money. Say, the city of Moscow has only the funds which we put there through our taxes being paid. And any country in Africa receives foreign aid. This is a source of the revenue, yes, of the budget. But and a fund raises clients' money. Parmalat Enron issues stock or borrow or sell sort of goods or services. I mean, this is technical. I mean, it's just the manager who is the mayor. So Bernie Madoff, Lushkov are the same kind of stuff. I state that in the recent 10 years, there's been $1 trillion, which was pocketed by various Bernie Madoffs, Lushkovs, Baturin. $1 trillion missing out of the world's economy. Add to that drug money, arms trafficking money, I mean, all sorts of criminal activities money. We can raise it to sort of a $1.5 trillion. If that amount of money sits in secret offshore jurisdictions, secret banks, secret accounts, secret lawyers, that could create a huge imbalance in the world economy. This is what should be understood by the world leaders, because probably the modern economic crisis in the world do not come as much from disbalances in the world trade or current account balances or cyclical nature of the world economy. It might come from just global corruption. And I intentionally do not differ various types of corruption. Private sector, it's still pocketing other people's money. And those who suffer are other small stockholders who end in their lives, say, a few hundreds or thousands of US dollars. Pension funds, taxpayers, and in the core of that is a manager who pockets money, and sometimes in the process he bribes various government agencies, regulators, etc. But I think we stand a much better chance now. I think the politicians in the world are much less corrupt than they used to be. They do understand that if they don't deal with corruption, nothing they can do in Afghanistan, as far as financial and economic aid is concerned, nothing they can do in Haiti, nothing they can do in Africa, nothing they can do in Papua New Guinea, nothing they can do in Russia, nothing they can do in Zimbabwe, Burma, Botswana, China, United States, in Europe. And the Americans, they do understand pretty well. That's why it's not only that they are sort of going against some competitors like Siemens or Daimler, because these companies are producing a huge economic effect inside the United States. UBS has a huge operation in the United States. So in a sense, the Americans are shooting themselves in the foot. So you couldn't simply claim it's just Americans using their lure against competitors. I mean, no, it's just complete turning upside down the whole argument. The Americans do understand that this is a phenomenally aggressive and evil and dangerous factor for the United States economy. Europeans do understand that. If your question would have been put to me 20 years ago, I would say vested interests. Say some interests of some bureaucracies with the banks. Let's look at the French system, where you're a politician, you go into the private sector, to the bank, from the bank you go back to the politics. And by the way, France, I think, is the country which I would keep aside as far as the anti-corruption war has been carried on in the recent years. The reasons I'll explain to you. I don't believe that Kirvel, who's been sentenced to 5 years in prison and 4 billion penalty, is the only one to be held responsible in the major French bank. I don't believe that. I don't think you can bet $60 billion banks positions without anybody knowing anything about it. Why is that? Each time you fight against a corrupt manager, you have to spend 10 years in courts all around the world and spend, if you're talking about 100 million stolen, you have to spend another 10 million to recover it. So it's really a much more important issue for the world economy and the future of global international financial and economic cooperation than we think. Add to that the bizarre question, which I always wanted to investigate, about oil prices. How on earth, over a few months' time, the oil prices could go to $140 per barrel, and then suddenly to 40? I mean, I've got somebody in the United States who's got a professor's degree in economics, who's telling me there is an XY countries involved and XY banks involved. And they're doing that not because the production of oil and the consumption of oil are so unclear for us. It's more or less clear. There's also reserves, right? But because they play the derivatives, options, futures, index, and all of these artificial additions to real supply and demand in oil, they create these disbalances and they make money when they move the prices up and then they make them collapse. Same as on derivatives, same on the mortgage markets, same of Goldman Sachs, which was mentioned many times in the local US investigations about playing against any trend in the market, which is oppositely then sold to the client. My dream is actually to have G8 set up a body, a plenipotentiary, which could be equal to the rights which the international anti-apartheid efforts taken when the world united against apartheid in South Africa. And with lists of actually criminals blacklisted, treated the same as their Nazi criminals, with lawyers which are money laundering, with all offshore jurisdictions completely eliminated, with the banks which are involved in money laundering and oil corruption being on the blacklist. And also this international body, somebody really who's been active in the field, heading it, cooperating efficiently with the tax authorities and law enforcement authorities of individual countries which do support this body. This is, let's say, the top of the effort which I may envisage